So I'm going to be talking, I suppose unsurprisingly, about archives and open humanities. Realistically, looking at ourselves to some extent, maybe tweaking people slightly that this isn't what we do, because it absolutely is, and I think that's the major message I kind of want to. So I'm coming. It's been really nice to hear so much talk about archives and archival principles as we've been talking on this. So it's a really apposite event to be at. Obviously, this event is open humanities in practice, but I personally would like to stress that that is but one part of what we can do. Archives, always say, can do particularly any discipline if we put ourselves into it. We've got records that I have yet to be tested and fail on this, can cover any sort of study. However, it would be wrong of me not to realise that humanities is not one of our natural home areas. And it's a place that we've been contributing to by having a self-conscious, open approach for ages and ages and ages. And that's really what I'm going to sort of go through today, just show how these principles of openness and transparency and access and open access to research and research materials is a foundational part of what we do in working in the humanities. So I thought I'd just start out by just giving the big picture, and what we have on the screen here is the Borthwick's mission statement. This is what we commit ourselves to. We support and expand the University of York's cultural endeavour and contribute to human understanding through collecting archives, preserving them and making them widely available for research to all people now and in the future. And I think the really key things here is just to hammer home those open messages, in that it's research for all people. It doesn't matter who you are. That's anyone from that first-time family history or local history researcher through to the big projects, as mentioned there by Rachel, with interviews and the Northern Way and other big, large projects that we get ourselves involved in. The whole thing is making it open and available, and that is really, and I say this as an Access archivist, and I know my successor as Access archivist is in the audience, making that stuff available is the crux of what we do. Yes, the big stuff in building storerooms and strong rooms and putting boxes on shelves and having the right environmental conditions and creating specialist spaces and doing digitization and having trained and talented staff who can make these things available. Going back to something that the Vice Chancellor always says, going back to Lord James in 1963, asking ourselves, what's it all for? From our point of view, it's to make it available so people like you can do that research. And it's also that commitment to doing this really in perpetuity as well, now and in the future, making that stuff available, saving it, keeping it, making it available, and making it available through trusted and auditable means, as Rachel was mentioning, now and into the far future, forever. It's kind of weird being in a forever institution, but that's what we do. So we're going to just go into the work of this chap. On the right here, Canon John Stanley Purvis, who is the director, the first director. In fact, I'm sat at his desk, weird as it might sound, of the Borthwick, from our foundation in 1953 for 10 years through to 1963. And amongst other things, as you can imagine, Canon Purvis was a diligent and dedicated researcher. His research interests were in particularly the clergy and the Tudor clergy in particular. And over a long time, he was going through the records that were part of the diocesan archive, and as part of his work as an archivist, but also part of his work as a historian, made diligent notes about clergy careers, because from the 19th century onwards, there's a publication. I fully intended to have one with me, but I don't have one in my office, I don't think, despite having all these books, called Crockford's Clerical Directory. And what that is, Crockford's is like a directory for the careers of clergy, and it's really useful for those who are doing clergy research, because it tells you where they were trained, where they've been as clergy, and then you can map their careers. But I think it was probably annoying Canon Purvis that there wasn't one for the Tudor period. So, using the resources in the Diocesan Archive, he put one together. And there it is in its raw format. It's called the Tudor Crockfords, and there's a Stuart one you can see to the left. And they document clergy careers through the 16th and 17th centuries. It's his own research. He went through things like Archbishop's Registers, Institution Act books, things like that, recreated these careers and kept his notes together as a research resource. And these were then as is often with manual information, which is what this is, in time it was made into what would then be called structured data. You know, a structured, searchable data set. Now, this was done in the 1960s and 1970s. So the next version of that structured data set, these being the original research products, is this structured data set, which is a card index. It's a really useful one because, as you can see here, it's taken the handwritten research we saw in the boxes previously, coded it up and put it into a searchable format on an index card with, on the right hand side there, chance A, B, 10. It's giving you references as well. And although the original research is in our strong room, this version here, this card index, exists and has always existed in our public research areas. And up until 2019, up until early 2020, researchers could come in and just flick through that and go back through that research to reconstruct clergy careers. And they're typed and they're referenced, and they're also cross-referenced as well by things like place and by subject. So why am I bringing this to your attention now? This is 1970s research. Well, it has a direct relevance now because a couple of weeks ago, some of you may remember Bill Shields of the University of York got in touch with me because he's doing a research project on the parish of Coxwold and wanted to reconstruct who had been vicar of Coxwold, I think between 1500 and 1660. So what did I do? I went back through the Tudor and Stuart Crockfords, going back through the handwritten notes and then through the index cards as well to reconstruct this whole clergy career. This is an example of a card. Annoyingly, it didn't have the bit for Coxwold on it on this one, but it's an example of the holes in research that you can fill yourself. So what I was able to do then, within the space of less than an hour, was reconstruct this little chain of people who've been vicar of Coxwold, which keys into a modern piece of research. The cards are really useful, okay? They also link through those references on the right-hand side, start to link through to content that's digitized. So what we have here is some references. You can see that RI20, for instance. Well, that's one of our Archbishop's registers. That's Archbishop's Register 20. And within 2 seconds, I was able to get to the digitized version of that reference, which is about the parish of Burnsall. It's about the death of that man. It's another mention of Thomas Kirkham. It actually mentions his death and the fact that the parish is going over to another clergyman. And also that card gives index through to that person's will, which is also held here in a reference there that we were able to resolve. So what, so really, so what has that actually shown us? Okay, well, that research had been made open and available in a trusted and managed research repository. It had been put into the Borthwick. Now, I'm sure there was Director of Borthwick Institute's privileges here. We don't always take research notes for one thing, but I guess as director then, he was able to possibly get his way slightly and put those in. But it's a model of how research had been made available and preserved in a trusted and managed research repository. The research notes were available, okay? So that might be quite common to some of you who, if you're here watching this now, who work in the sciences, you might find that you often keep your lab notes as something that you would submit into research repositories. Well, there's a similar version of that in those boxes that I showed you because that's where the original notes are. The research notes were available for us to consult, as well as the final outputs, which has become that as an interim stage, that card indexed. The research was also well structured. The database was well structured with clear and open referencing to available content. And we have the ability here to resolve some of those obsolete references. We've had the ability to resolve those references into modern ones to support someone doing that research in the future. And it had been, moreover than that, managed and preserved throughout its life cycle to allow future researchers to come back and reinterrogate that from a slightly different angle. So, and archival colleagues in the audience may well now be emitting a large groan of pain, but Sir Hilary Jenkinson still, to a greater or lesser degree, forms a fair bit of UK archival theory, even though this was written in 1929. expressed then how being open and making research resources available to people is a fundamental part of the archivist's code, really, that we exist in order to make other people's work possible. Unknown people for the most part, and working very possibly on lines equally unknown to them. Some of them quite distant in the future. It's a fact that most of the people who will benefit from the work we do today have not yet been born and won't be born for quite some time. And upon lines as predictable, their aim to provide, without prejudice or thought, for all who wish to know the means of knowledge. So making that information available, creating open knowledge and research is a fundamental part of what we do. So access to that information and open access to that information is a key part of what an archivist does. It's part of the accreditation standard that archives have to meet and keep to. We are assessed on this. The Borthwick was given the full 6 years under the National Archives Accreditation Scheme, partly because we had the kind of ability to do this kind of open access and research. And we're going to be assessed on it again in a couple of months, and we'll be fully reassessed on it in 3 years, but it forms a fundamental part of what we do. And there are actually very few restrictions on access to researchers in the main. And one of our jobs is ensuring that any barriers are minimized to the greatest possible extent to allow people to access this information. So I put that in there as a bit of a challenge to this notion that archives are a closed thing, that it's difficult to get into, that there are barriers there. A lot of this is ensuring that trust and authenticity that we really pride as part of what we do, allowing you as the researcher to access trusted information. So looking at the Borthwick itself, what do we do really to back this up? In our agreements, we say these things will make the archive available to the general public for research under the terms of Freedom of Information Act, subject to the provisions of the Data Protection Act 2018 and all the other relevant information legislation. So we'll make it available to the extent within the law, the restrictions that allow, particularly in regard to personal data. We'll prepare finding aids for the archive to the recognised international standards. We will facilitate discovery and access to this content, and we'll make those finding aids publicly available, which we do through our online finding aid, which we call Borthcat. And that is how we facilitate access and openness and open research in the context of archives. So that's the kind of structural stuff that we will do in terms of our internal processes, our internal ethos, and our internal commitment. And Rachel has already touched on some of this in how we might make this available and use open approaches to ensure that availability as well. So I'm just going to walk you through one of those examples. I've already shown you some of these images from the Archbishop's Registers. So these are the documents that Canon Purvis was using in those index cards I showed you early on. We digitized these in 2015 as part of a project funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and developed an online tool to host those images using an open image standard. Rachel already mentioned it, IIIF. That allows these images here to be used by anyone who has a IIIF compliant browser. It's really freely available. Google, Mirador, or IIIF browser, you'll find image viewer, you'll find an example. We have made these available online. They have an open license, and we also, to facilitate discovery and openness, have run and are still running projects to add metadata and explanatory information using previous openly available resources. You can see an example here of a 14th century record here from Register 7. It's a papal bull confirmation between the Pope and the Archbishop of York about Selby Abbey. We've used and structured that data for discoverability, adding things like entry types, control taxonomies to enable trusted discovery, but built in open source technologies. If you go into the About part of the website, you can see on the top right hand side, all of our code and information is available there. It shows you how we did it. It shows you how we've done it. There are manifests on there, IIIF manifests that you could take. So say you're a researcher in Durham, you're using the Durham Cathedral Library records that have also been done on IIIF, and you have an inkling that maybe the scribes in one section could be the same person. It would be possible for you to sit there and view archives from both York and Durham on the same screen using these open technologies, so you can compare the handwriting, expression, or the content of those documents. And one of the steps forward that's going to happen, I think, in the future with this particular resource here, is that using that open technology to bring in resources from elsewhere. So as part of the Northern Way project that I've already mentioned, that's indexing the Archbishop's registers for the period 1306 to 1406, we are going to virtually reunite records that are held here and at York Minster archives that are for the work of the archbishops. That has never happened before. We've never, physically relocating those is something you wouldn't want to do. We can do that using this electronic, these open technologies, and making it available here for anyone to discover. And our technological information is available. Here it is on GitHub, fully available for anyone to go through and reconstruct and make their own tools based upon what we've done. Again, making it available for us to facilitate the means of knowledge and the ends of research. I'm going to draw that to a close there. I don't want to go on too long. There's other presentations to come. But I just want to reinforce that, yeah, in terms of what we do as archivists, it's been really ably demonstrated by Rachel. We are here to make that information available. It's a fundamental part of the work we do, and a fundamental part of how we support that open research in the humanities. There'll be questions later, but other than that, thank you very much.